No.
Ya, pues, ella estaba en España y luego van a Venezuela. Ya se fue a Venezuela.
No me pones en
Y ella está acá.
De los niños en la noche, estoy 3 horas al día. En las noches, estoy que a 3 horas al día, no va a poder ir a cuarto.
Él está en la procura de la nacionalidad con la finalidad de luego establecer una condición laboral, tener la disponibilidad de un asilo laboral, tú sabes, y tratando de ver como y tener esta alternativa. Salud.
No need for this, gracias.
For the video.
Ah, for the video?
For the video.
Which video?
There.
Ah, there is a video.
Aquí.
Yes, but it's not live, but it's there.
Ah, okay. Closer. Is it mine or yours? ¿Cuál? Ah, sí, claro, obviamente. Sí, ¿cómo estuvo el trabajo?
Todos los días, excepto el día libre, bueno, 2 veces al día. De hecho, nunca tengo fin de semana libre.
Καλησπέρα σας. Αγαπητοί φίλοι της Βενεζουέλας, για μένα θα είναι μεγάλη τιμή να μίλησω ελεύθερα στο Free Thinking Zone. Κάτι που δεν μπορώ να κάνω στη χώρα μου. Είναι μεγάλη μου τιμή η παρουσία σας. Είμαι πολύ χαρούμενος που βρίσκομαι στην Αθήνα, όπου οι πολίτες της άρχισαν να μιλάνε για αξίες για τις οποίες θα μιλήσω απόψε. Δημοκρατία και ελευθερία. Θα ήθελα να ξέρετε ότι η Αθηναϊκή Δημοκρατία, το κράτος δικαίου και η ελευθερία είναι πηγή έμπνευσης τώρα για όλους τους Βενεζουελάνους. Θα μοιραστώ μαζί σας την ελπίδα ότι ο Πρόεδρος Γουαϊδό θα φέρει ένα τέλος στον αγώνα και στην ταλαιπωρία διάμεσου δικαίων προεδρικών εκλογών και του κράτους δικαίου. Ευχαριστώ πολύ. I don't know if you understood what I said. Siga. Now I will switch to English because I know there are some Spanish speakers, but I will use English as also for the video, and I will try to give a little bit of a small statement of what the situation is, and then I'll open to questions, which I think is a much better use of all our time. Again, as the title, Venezuela Speaking Truth to Power, I will start with a personal testimony. At around 1 p.m. on a January day in 2019, Ana Lucia Rodriguez heard someone breaking her front door. It was a Maduro-created Special Action Forces, FAES officer, stating that a criminal was hiding in their neighborhood. The officer asked Ana Lucia who was at the home with her, to which she replied her daughter, her son, and her grandchildren. The officer asked her what her son did for a living, and she replied that he was a computer and a phone repairman. The officer then told everyone to leave the house except for Ana Lucia's son, Juan Guaido, who was in his room. His room was locked, and the officer made Ana Lucia's family go to a neighbor's house because Juan Guaido would be giving the officer a statement. At the neighbor's house, another FAES officer told her that her son was wanted on 20 drug trafficking charges. Promptly hearing 6 shots next door. The officers took a picture of Juan Diego's deceased body besides the gun, where it was published in media reports calling him a criminal. The death certificate noted that the cause of death was a cardiogenic shock and a cardiac injury caused by a firearm. As of August 2019, Ana Lucia nor her neighbor have been asked to testify to prosecutors about the case. Ana Lucia says she wants justice for the extrajudicial death of her son, and she says they can't decide who lives and who dies. There are 3 urgent dimensions to the Venezuelan humanitarian crisis which I want to convey to you. 1 is democracy and human rights, 2 is the humanitarian crisis, and 3 is the environment. On 1, Maduro's democracy and human rights, Maduro's presidential period ended on January 10, 2019, meaning that there isn't a properly elected president since then, and that the executive power is being usurped by Mr. Maduro. The democratic forces have asked since 2018 for free and fair presidential elections based on democratic rules. And I'll give you some stats to follow this up. In 2018, Maduro illegalized all major political parties and banned the top democratic candidates from participating in any elections. 2, the democratic forces then applied provisions of the 1999 Constitution, and Mr. Guaido, an elected member of parliament for the Vargas region, and an elected Speaker of the House by 2/3 of parliament, assumes the interim mandate of the presidency, a decision backed by most Latin American countries, Canada, the EU, and the United States. As of June 2019, 22 of 167 National Assembly deputies, including its president and its vice president, have been stripped of their parliamentary immunity by the Maduro Tribunal of Justice, of course. In addition, the parliament's vice president was illegally imprisoned for over 150 days, along with other 22 deputies who have also been imprisoned or in exile. These, according, and all of this, all of the numbers that we're providing have documents and reports that you can look up, this will provide you your own set of conclusions, like the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, for example. According to the NGO Foro Penal, at least 15,203 persons or people have been detained for political motives from January 2014 until today. Of them, 402 are still detained today, of which 20 are women, 112 are military, and only 20 of those 402 have been sentenced. Of the 15,000 that have been detained, 8,000, almost more than half of them, are still with the open files in courts. Maduro's security apparatus have been linked to at least 18,000 extrajudicial killings since 2016, of which I told the story of Juan Diego, which is one of those 18,000 Venezuelans. The government has attempted to impose a communicational hegemony, enforcing its own version of events, blocking internet, and in the last 10 years, NGO Espacio Público registered the arbitrary detention of 55 people for social media publications, 24 of them only in 2018. Humanitarian crisis. Maduro regime policies and political decisions have provoked the largest humanitarian crisis and the largest movement of people in Latin America and the Western Hemisphere, when not accounting for a natural disaster or a traditional war. At the beginning of November 2019, there were 4,626,968 Venezuelans, migrants, and refugees globally. That represents more than 15% of the population. In the latest 2019 report by the OAS Working Group on Venezuelan migrants and refugees, we could be looking at a number of closer to 5 and 5.5 million at the end of this year, and close to 6, 7, or even potentially 8 million at the end of 2020. 8 out of 10 Venezuelans have reported reducing their caloric intake due to lack of food at home. And approximately 1/3 of Venezuelans eat less than 3 meals a day with low caloric and protein content. More than half of the population registered 11 kilos of weight loss on average. 3.2 million children are urgently in need of food, medicine, and education. The National Hospital Survey of 2019 found 1,557 people died due to lack of supplies in hospitals. Inflation was estimated by the IMF to be, for 2019, in the order of 10 million%. Finally, the Homeland Card, which was a Maduro-devised identification card linked to an automated payment system, which is necessary to have access to all social programs in Venezuela, such as food, medicine, and fuel subsidies. The card implies having a political affiliation with the regime. The third point is the environment. Maduro regime has openly promoted environmental destruction through illegal mining, the Amazon and Orinoco River being the ones that suffer the most, with the goal of financing the system, avoiding sanctions. His regime is a key threat to biodiversity, indigenous people, and the protection of the Amazon. The Orinoco River is the third largest river in the world and extremely important for biodiversity in the region. Venezuela has the second largest gold reserves in the world and have decreed with this the planned Orinoco mining arc, which has been destroying the Amazon, particularly the Orinoco River, which has an extensity of 112,000 square kilometers that are reaching gold, diamond, and coltan. Illegal mining has affected already 172,492 people in the Amazon state and about 4 million people in the Amazonas state of Brazil. This is the context under which we are seeing the Maduro regime, and this has provoked two things. One of them being a regional coalition of international support since January 2019 of 58 countries by now, including the latest Bolivia. The Lima Group recently met on November 8, 2019 and reiterated their support of President and for interim President Guaido and the need for a political, peaceful and democratic solution to solve the complex crisis in Venezuela. On April 9th, the Permanent Council of the Organization of American States recognized Ambassador Tarre Briceño as a permanent representative designated by the National Assembly as the Ambassador of Venezuela to the OAS. In addition, the International Contact Group, which was created in January 2019, which has 8 EU members and 5 countries from Latin America, are also aligned with the goal of finding a political solution to restore democracy in Venezuela. Thus, I think this encapsulates that this is well beyond a US-led movement. And third, and finally, which are a little bit of what we're fighting for and the actions and the support we need from all those present. One, we are fighting for A, the end of usurpation of the Maduro regime. 2, a transitional government. And 3, free and fair elections. And where can we help specifically to account for this? 1, ensure that the humanitarian aid reaches those most in need on the ground in Venezuela. It is inconceivable that Maduro still today politicizes the access of aid into Venezuela. 2, sanctions. Increase the necessary pressure through targeted sanctions on Maduro regime officials that could be imposed in the EU. 3, a path of a coordinated EU strategy between the Organization of American States, the Lima Group, as well as the International Contact Group, that would align all the efforts and maximize the impact behind the political solution. 4, further recognition, and that means greater recognition of the legitimacy of the interim government. European member states have been at the forefront of recognizing President Guaido and his mandate under the Venezuelan constitution. A key step would be to build on this and give the platform access and resources to his representatives in Europe to engage across the capitals. Finally, Reconstruction, which talks about the development plans to help in the stabilization and rebuilding of Venezuela, once the usurpation of power ceases. This will allow for the voluntary return of millions and a stabilization effort, which Europe could play an important role with their vast expertise and knowledge, which would be critical to sustaining a political solution. All the Venezuelans look for your support in order to get more sanctions across human rights violators and increase diplomatic pressure so that the usurper sees the real need to negotiate a peaceful and democratic transition with inclusion, reconciliation, justice, governability, and of course, democracy. Thank you very much. Now, to make this more dynamic, I definitely want to answer as many questions as possible, and everything is on the table. So, who wants to start with some questions?
You want to start?
Well, yeah.
You sure?
So, initially, welcome to Greece. And
Thanks, Bolivia.
I'd like to hear from you what's your plan in order to promote your position, because right now, of course, you're recognized by the Greek state as representative of the current situation, like the Guaido type of government. But how you plan to establish yourself at the same time with the existing de facto ambassador of Venezuela in Greece? How you plan to, develop relationship? Are you actually able to do that? Do you face any challenges in that? Like, how do you manage the relationship?
Yeah, well, I think laying what I've just said of the humanitarian crisis, of the displacement of almost 4.7 million people, about 2/3 or a third of children under 5 are seriously malnourished. Of the 18,000 extrajudicial killings we have discovered, it is quite a challenge, I would say, to simply expect that the de facto representatives of Maduro here would be having reconciliation with the representatives part of the agenda. I think for us it's more important the European people, in this case the Greek people, to be able to give visibility to this issue, to them, to you, thus to also get the necessary support from all the capitals of Europe for them to have the dialogue directly with the Maduro representatives, for them to seize power peacefully in order to allow for free, fair elections as soon as possible. I think it's not in our role at this point, beyond representing all Venezuelans here in Greece, which probably includes them as well, as I'm saying, in the case of diplomatic representatives, there's certainly Venezuelans, to represent them, but in no space this is a call for a dialogue here in Athens between the two parts. I think the political situation is quite clear. The humanitarian case is quite clear, and if anything, they are still denying that this reality exists, and as I said, they are participants of this humanitarian destruction that the Venezuelans are living. So in a way they are responsible for this, and as such they should assume that responsibility and allow, if anything, for a peaceful transition.
But talking about support, what kind of support do you expect?
From who in this case? From
European states?
Well,
To materialize somehow.
Certainly. Well, I think number one is a humanitarian aid and support. Until now, the numbers per refugee are quite low by standards of refugee crisis all over the world. And in addition, there is as I said, the legitimacy which Venezuelans can receive by recognizing more fully the interim government, and thus the representatives here, which will allow for further pressure. And third, the promotion of individual targeted sanctions in Brussels that would put the Maduro regime under further pressure to negotiate for elections and presidential elections.
I would like...
Sure, of course, yeah.
Ambassador, thank you very much for this introduction. For us, Venezuela is something which has also been part of the Greek political agenda, not directly, but indirectly in any case, for sure. And of course, through Venezuela, we try to understand in general like the politics of Latin America, which is like also a region which is for us exotic, but now important as it seems. Therefore, and despite the fact that it's only the second question, I would like to ask you about the recent events in Bolivia with like the fall of power of President Morales, who was like one of the people who many Europeans regarded as a hero in Latin America, but we saw that this wasn't actually something which represented the whole reality of the situation. Is there any analogies, any teachings, any lessons for the Venezuelan case? Like, and do you see it as a positive effect, as a negative effect, as a totally relevant effect from Venezuela?
Sure. So it's a great question. I think it's a question that everyone in Europe is asking. I will start to make sure we are not judging Morales' 14-year term, which I think is a fair debate, and it has some interesting implications, even though Morales throughout his 14 years was not necessarily a friend of Venezuelan democracy. There is quite a symbolic significance of someone from the indigenous populations of Bolivia reaching power, and I think everyone has a natural empathy to that and to the Bolivian democratic process. I would add, however, just judging the last election, which comes in a context under which the Bolivian constitution did not allow him to run a fourth time. So that is one ingredient of what happened in Bolivia. He was running on a fourth term, which the constitution did not allow. Thus, he tried reforming the constitution and submitted this constitutional reform to the vote of the people. The Bolivians rejected this constitutional reform, and he, under an argument that running for office violated and impeded his human rights, decided to overrule a referendum and the majority of the Bolivian opinion and ran. This notwithstanding, with the electoral results, the OAS on this first round of elections demonstrated that there were serious irregularities on this election, and the people went into the streets for over 20 days asking him to allow for free and fair election. Towards the final days, the decision of the people, because there was clear evidence that he had violated electoral norms, they asked for his resignation and go before justice to respond to those electoral crimes. He decided to resign and decided to flee to Mexico under political persecution. I think it's important that Bolivians have an orderly transition of power, and that is, as soon as possible, accounts for a presidential election that allows for the Bolivians to decide electorally and democratically who should be ruling over the country. We have expressed, and interim President Guaido has expressed his solidarity on the interim president as well, Bolivia, in this case Senator Janine Áñez. And our message to Bolivians is that this comes to an electoral conclusion as soon as possible, which is exactly the same conclusion that Venezuelans want. To what effect this has on Venezuelans? A short one, I would say, it's of motivation. That when citizens organize, when citizens are mobilized with the support of all life forces of society, which includes politicians, civil society, police, and in this case the military, this allows for people to express themselves. I know it's quite a sensitive subject, but I do believe that if this concludes in a peaceful, orderly election where Bolivians decide, I do believe that is quite the result everyone will support. Yes. Más preguntas? Any other questions? Maybe we can open to Spanish as well.
Yes, yes, please, please.
Tienen preguntas en español también, ya que sé que hay bastantes personas habla hispanas en el grupo.
Alguien debe traducir para los mercados.
Sí. Any other comments or suggestions?
Could you go through your background a little bit?
Yeah, of course,
like
of course.
How you ended up in Greece?
Of course,
Talking
of course,
in a bunch of strangers?
of course. So my background, so I was from Venezuela. I spent all my life there. For the first 30 years of my life, I was there. Raised there, went to school there. Decided to go to the university in Venezuela. Studied economics and then law school in the evenings. As I, at some point, I had as a lot of youth, young Venezuelans in the year 2000s have political aspirations. So I thought a law degree would maybe come handy to go for a congressional race or something, a parliament. And in 2000, we started seeing I would say, the democratic and the institutional destruction of Venezuela from the 2000s. There were some big events in 2002. And in 2004, 2005, students were put at the forefront with the deterioration of the political leadership at the time. Students also saw the military go into the universities, specifically the University of Los Andes in Mérida, and invade or go against the autonomy of universities in Venezuela in 2005. This activated a lot of us to participate more actively in politics, and we started organizing and doing think tanks and meetings like this, where we started discussing what was a constitution, what were human rights, what was university autonomy, and having this conversation within ourselves. In 2007, with the shutdown of Radio Caracas television, students decided to participate more actively in the political discourse, and I joined with a group of students then in 2007, what was then the Venezuelan student movement, now of which interim President Guaido was part of this. At the time you had other more well-known students as, say, Juan Guaido, Stalin Gonzalez, which were speakers of our movement. And I was part of this. When I graduated, I joined a free liberal think tank, partner of Kefim here, and the Frederick Naumann foundation called Ηis Libertad. And I did some grassroots and research work for them for a while. I also joined the presidential campaign as a volunteer on the international efforts for Enrique Capriles in 2012 and 13, and I was part of that. And then I decided to go to the US and do a master's and go abroad and study, and that was also a big part of my life. I did a master's in public policy, so still looking at what I'm doing now, as a big reason, but also a business degree, as looking on how to best also serve and connect the private sector to the reconstruction of Venezuela. I joined a technology company after an MBA that brought me to its headquarters in Nicosia. I lived in Nicosia for a bit, lived in Sao Paulo as well, and when time came in 2019, I think the opportunity was very, very clear that we all should be part of this moment, that Venezuela was living a quite unique window of which to go back to democracy peacefully, and that's how I decided to help and volunteer to support in any way I could. And with that, I got responsibilities to work closely to Cyprus and the Greek governments. There was a change in the Greek government, as you know, in July, and with that came a change in terms of recognition. One of those 58 countries that recognized, and then I was humbled, and I guess I got the honor of getting a call from President Guaido and the Parliament to see if I could assume this diplomatic responsibility of becoming then Ambassador of Venezuela to Greece. And that is a little bit longer story, but it is quite my path here.
Give me some color.
That's my question.
Sure.
What is your relations with the embassy, the ambassador of Venezuela in Greece,
Sure.
and the people of the embassy, of the employees of embassy of
Sure,
Venezuela
sure.
in Greece?
No, I do not have.
And to extended community, like
Yeah, I do not have. I have a relation with all the diaspora, and I've been quite active meeting with all the diaspora Venezuelans in Greece. And I organized the meeting even before I got this appointment to get to speak and meet all of them as much as those that were willing to come to the meeting. When we got the recognition in July 7th, if I'm not mistaken, the day. Well, it was a Friday after the Sunday of the election, so it was probably July 12th. We had a meeting with all the diaspora, some of which were here and were present, to discuss this recognition by the Mitsotaki's new government. And then again, we've been very active in meeting. We had a second or a third meeting in this case. And also a rally recently in Sintagma this past weekend on Saturday. So with the diaspora, if anything, it's since the first day I've said I owe and I'm here to serve them and channel their frustration with the humanitarian crisis, their frustration with the political discourse and the direction the country is in, and I am quite close with the usurped embassy. We have very little to none contact, as is the case with Mr. Maduro. So our only we have, let's say, our main discussion here is with Venezuelans, and that is 94% of the population that wants change. And if anything, the discussion should be when and how we're having elections as soon as possible in Venezuela. The same is my message to the usurped embassy.
Do you send a message to the ambassador of Maduro's government in Athens?
No, because at the end of the day, he's following instructions of Mr. Maduro, and I think the message should be directed to Caracas. I don't think I have a mandate to discuss or negotiate anything with them at this point.
somewhere in Greece.
No, it is a good question to understand how can they still validate what is happening, and the questions, I think, my questions to them would be about the freedom of the press, the political prisoners, why are there still 402 political prisoners, of which 20 are women, 112 are military. I think those are the questions that I would direct, and yeah, and why are they still clinging to power? Sí.
Yo no creo que nunca Maduro va a caer con manera pacífica en Venezuela.
Sí.
Que la única solución es que Guaidó encuentre amigos que puedan dar abajo de la mesa armas en el pueblo de Venezuela. Porque no hay otra manera. Para mí no hay otra manera. Si la gente no tiene igualita manera de defenderse, nunca pueden regresar las cosas. ¿Entiendes?
Sí, claro, entiendo
Yo creo
perfecto.
que es importante que Guaidó encuentre manera económica
Sí.
para encontrar bajo de la mesa armas para dar pueblo y gente que son de Latinoamérica o Europa que pueden ayudar en eso. Y yo creo que todos debemos estar en ese camino, porque Venezuela es hasta acá, la gente sufre demasiado.
Sí.
Salen del país con muy dificultad y la única manera para caer Maduro ahora no es pacífica.
No sé si lo quieres decir en griego para que ellos también, los demás entiendan.
Λέω ότι
O sea, ahí lo quieren hacer en griego.
no, si quieren no.
Para griego, para que entiendan, sí.
Λέω ότι δεν υπάρχει τρόπος να πέσει ο Μαδούρο αυτή τη στιγμή στη Βενεζουέλα με τρόπο ειρηνικό και ότι πρέπει όλοι να βρούμε έναν τρόπο ο Γουαϊδό να βρει φίλους, να γίνει μια οικονομική ενίσχυση και να μοιραστούν όπλα, γιατί αν δεν έχει ο κόσμος όπλα, όταν μπαίνουν μέσα στο σπίτι του, δεν μπορεί να μηνθεί. Και ο μόνος τρόπος για να γίνει αυτό το πράγμα, στα αλήθεια όμως, έτσι, κάτω από το τραπέζι πρέπει αυτοί οι άνθρωποι να έχουν όπλα. Για να μπορούν όταν βγαίνουν στον δρόμο που τους πυροβολούν και τους σκοτώνουν, να μπορούν να κάνουν άμυνα. Δεν υπάρχει άλλος τρόπος αυτή στη Βενεζουέλα. Είναι σαν να ανοίξουμε το σπίτι μας και να μπουν μέσα αυτοί που είναι κόντρα στο καθεστώς και να μας σκοτώσουν. Αν εγώ δεν έχω όπλο να πολεμήσω εκείνη τη στιγμή και να σκοτώσω και να φάω όσο πιο πολλούς μπορώ, δεν μπορεί να γίνει διαφορετικά. Δυστυχώς στη Βενεζουέλα πρέπει να γίνει πόλεμος από τους, πώς τους λένε που τους έχουν φέρει, τους κολεκτίβους. Πρέπει ο Βενεζουελάνος να φάει κολεκτίβο, δεν γίνεται διαφορετικά.
It's not that the solution that this kind of political change would be done in Venezuela and any kind of other civilized country of this world. I don't think this kind of solution is not be able to do it with a gun. No. No.
I think what I will empathize with is desperation, but our position is quite clear. The last 10 months, and I think it's something that's quite fascinating. That in all these 15,000 political prisoners, all of them, none of them have been caught with weapons, with trying to hurt or damage property. Compare this to what is happening in other countries, even a democratic country like Chile, where Yorgos, Joanna, and Nikis spent some time of their lives. It's quite amazing, living under full dictatorship, in a dictatorship that has assassin family members. You do not see the response we have seen in Santiago, which I think is commendable, of the democratic, peaceful nature of Venezuela. It could also be prolonging this issue because we don't have a monopoly or the force, but it definitely goes away from as you're saying our principles and what we consider that is our strength, which is the people, the democratic values, the liberal values of human rights. So this goes against everything we've been fighting and what we stand for. So I know it's quite challenging and desperate, but the path is there, and this is where we are. I understand. I think both and everyone's desperation, but I think the bottom line is our need for this to be as peaceful and democratic as possible. And I will add, there's still a way we can continue and further deepening the pressure on the peaceful means, and that is expanding the list of individual sanctions, and these are targeted sanctions to individuals who are enjoying corrupt money and violating human rights, and that they have free access to Europe. And this cannot happen. This is the path that we can
You
continue.
can pressure on this way. You
We can
pressure this
continue
way,
to go this way, and I think the Magnitsky Act, which is an interesting discussion that is out there in terms of violators of human rights in Russia, should be analogous to the Venezuelan affairs and other countries where we've seen flagrant violations of human rights, like Iran. And now I'm entering in territory that's not of my radar, but I will definitely mention that all of these have analogous and similar characteristics.
May I combine a question
Of course.
comment to answer one of the issues raised?
Of course.
Starting off with the question, I think what the public perceive of the international inertia that started at the beginning of the year is that this momentum is starting to be lost. We saw lots of countries recognizing Guaido at the beginning of the year. This faded throughout the year. Bolton is no longer the side of Trump, who was a leading force in America's support towards Venezuela. We had a BRICS meeting just last week in Brazil. The whole issue of Venezuela was not even discussed. It wasn't even raised. And I think the people on the international scene, their concern is that this push, this inertia that started very well in the beginning of the year is slowly being lost. One of the reasons why it's being lost is on the international scene with countries such as Russia. And this is how I answer your point that you raised. Since 2014, Russia has sold over $10 billion of arms to Venezuela through the Euro government. Venezuela at the moment has the strongest military presence in Latin America. It is extremely difficult, and I'm not talking about a military action from the United States, but for a coup within the country or aggression which will derive from neighboring countries to actually overthrow the government in Maduro. And I think Maduro's power lies in the military. This is how he keeps the country going. So to combine both, my question to you is, how do you see this inertia? I mean, do you think it's fading? Is there a push? Is there something on the international scene with the BRICS countries which we see that there's not such a good relation with the Guaido government?
Well, like anything that takes this long, or this process that takes this long, inevitably you will have moments and momentums that go up and down. I think by now we all had the expectation that that this would have concluded. I do agree that the expectations were set either quite low or short in terms of how fast this transition could move. And sadly to all Venezuelans, it has been a tough realization of how tough this this transition period has been. I look at this from two perspectives. From a big picture perspective, that I think if you look at the big picture, there is still momentum in the sense that you are seeing countries still join the recognition of interim President Guaido, maybe not at the speed or with the strength of January or February. You have seen immediate recognition, say, of Bolivia. You could potentially see that in Uruguay once they have presidential elections there. There is conversation with countries that have not publicly expressed their recognition to either cooperate openly and potentially expand the coalition to Asia and African countries. That is a reality that continues. That is a living organism that continues to operate and work and expand. So from that perspective, there is not a lost momentum. I would agree, however, that we hit a sort of wall in Venezuela domestically in terms of the popular mobilization. And I think that speaks to the recent attempt of interim President Guaido to mobilize and animate people to understand that while there could be all the support and actions and calls and tweets from foreign governments, it will depend at the end of the day of Venezuelans, by Venezuelans, to make this decision. It seems quite irrealistic that a foreign force is going to come and save us, which is our disagreement even domestically with media and politicians who are pushing this agenda, which has discouraged and demotivated people from participating and understanding that the liberation of Venezuela has to come internally. And I know this has been asked multiple times, but there is no momentum, international momentum, if there is not domestic momentum. And I think all the efforts, when you mentioned BRICS, I think a very different story would have been the BRICS discussion if the entire population would have been mobilized in Caracas, in the presidential palace in Venezuela, in Miraflores. I think the discussion on BRICS then would have become a necessary response to what their position is with that status. So at this point, I think the momentum is still there in terms of that the majority of the people still want change. That has not changed. Countries that have recognized President Guaido still recognize President Guaido, but I do think there has to be a combination of institutional pressure and domestic pressure. And I think that's where the game lies. If people really want a free country, we're going to have to give a little bit more time and effort to this. I know it's quite a big ask of people because people have lost their lives. As we expressed, more than 18,000 extrajudicial killings, political prisoners. It's exhausting. Very few countries and societies have gone through this for so long and have been able to survive. But if anything, Saturday tells us is that the people are still out there. I think with a clear strategy, a clear plan, episodes will come and momentum could change very, very quickly. But it is a challenge. I think it's sort of an open question of when momentum will also come to look like it did in January or February. But we have to continue pushing and it's a collective effort. But as I said, and I will conclude with the big picture, where we are now is way better than where we were in the last 20 years, with presence in more than 35 countries. Today or later this week, we will have an appointed ambassador in Bolivia, which will be recognized with full credentials. Presence in all these countries, advocating, giving visibility, is part of this. Organized, unified, as a democratic force. I think it's something we didn't have in December of last year. So while this has been longer than we all desired, big picture-wise, we're in a much better position than we were.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Eduardo,
Sí, gracias.
para todos los presentes, encantada, un placer. Mi nombre es María Mercedes Velasco. A mí hay un punto que me tiene bastante inquieta, que es en torno a la función que nosotros como miembros de un país que es Venezuela, en esta región, pudiésemos desarrollar. ¿Qué quiero decir con eso? Yo no sé cuántos de ustedes acá están en condición de asilo o de exilado. Yo me declaro exilada forzosamente, porque de lo contrario, si yo hubiese optado por venir a Grecia y solamente los 3 meses, yo estuviese incursa en un delito. Yo veo en la necesidad de ir a las instancias de buscar asilo. Sin embargo, como tal, no se ha cumplido, solo que tuve la gracia, la bendición y la oportunidad de conseguir una vía a través de la cual tener mi seguridad social, el ANCA, el ASA, es decir, entrar en el sistema y disponer de la carta blanca que llaman acá para los extranjeros, pero ya hay un detalle, mi pasaporte no está en mi cartera, ni en mi maleta, ni en mi gavetero, mi pasaporte está ya metido. Si yo quiero ir a Chipre y necesito el pasaporte, yo no puedo ir, yo no puedo salir de aquí. Entonces, siento, vamos a decirlo y lo voy a decir, creo que soy un poco egoísta con este planteamiento. La reunión es muy interesante en torno a lo que está pasando en Bolivia, en Chile, en etcétera lugares. Pero dentro del marco de nuestra participación aquí existencial, nosotros somos venezolanos y estamos en Grecia. ¿Qué podemos hacer nosotros a favor de Venezuela desde este territorio? ¿Y qué podemos hacer nosotros a favor de nosotros mismos, entre nosotros, para el caso como, por ejemplo, el caso, planteé mi caso personal?
Sí, sí.
Yo quisiera ir a rescatar mi pasaporte y en cualquier momento montarme en un avión y volver a mi país. Pero si yo voy a buscar mi pasaporte, me expongo a tener que marcharme. Y no es mi idea. Mi idea es tener la lograda libertad de disponer de esa, justamente de eso. Ir, venir, salir, entrar, mientras transcurre el tiempo. Ahora bien, como mi caso, está también el caso de otra persona que yo se lo presenté a Eduardo, que también él es otra situación, él es hijo de griegos, etcétera, tiene otra situación y tiene un canal diferente. Mi pregunta en cuestión sobre ese tópico que estoy trayendo a la mesa es, ¿tienen noción de cuántas personas representan en Grecia y en esta región, Chipre, Grecia, que son unificados, la diáspora? ¿Tenemos números de diáspora venezolana?
Sí, no hay un número exacto, pero yo creo que es una pregunta súper válida y muy importante que tenemos que trabajar. Yo estoy de acuerdo contigo, inclusive ya en la primera reunión que tuve con la Dirección de Asuntos de América Latina del Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores, le mencioné que tenemos que abrir un canal para atender casos de venezolanos en Grecia que tienen problemas o tienen asuntos migratorios, como el caso de asilo, como casos de documentación, de pasaportes vencidos, que eso es una realidad a la cual el régimen de Maduro nos ha obligado a sufrir y vivir. La respuesta es que ellos están totalmente a la orden para canalizar ese tipo de situaciones. Lo que yo creo que en ese caso podemos organizarnos como diáspora para asegurar de que esos casos los tenemos documentados y en una reunión esta semana o la próxima semana se los presentemos en la medida de que sean más casos en un solo encuentro, facilita que todos esos casos sean atendidos. Pero yo estoy totalmente de acuerdo contigo de que parte de nuestro rol, si bien hay un tema político y diplomático, también hay un asunto de facilitar el drama de los venezolanos en nuestros países. Y tu caso, como el caso del señor a quien te refieres, y todos los demás casos, lo que sí necesito es la ayuda desde la diáspora para organizarnos y tener eso documentado, personas que les faltan pasaportes, personas que tienen pasaportes por vencer, y poder reunirme yo con ellos y plantearles específicamente, como lo hemos hecho en otros países, que se ha logrado, como el caso de Canadá, Brasil, etcétera, que han permitido y han autorizado a aceptar pasaportes vencidos, por ejemplo. Pero sin lugar a dudas, yo creo que eso es algo que debemos empezar, y más bien pido de tu apoyo para que juntos documentemos todos esos casos y cuanto antes los presentemos frente a Cancillería, y que Cancillería, en el caso que nos tenga que nos redireccione a la institución del Ministerio de Interior pertinente para conseguir de parte de ellos toda la buena voluntad posible. Sin lugar a dudas, en eso estoy totalmente de acuerdo contigo.
Quizás pueda ayudar
acaban de votar una nueva ley sobre el asilo. En este momento la situación de los inmigrantes, o llámese como se llame, es muy crítica en Grecia. Hay mucha gente que está entrando y la semana pasada hubo una nueva ley que quizá hay que buscarla y hay que ver, creo que ha cambiado un poco el tema del asilo.
Great.
Si uno reúne las condiciones, automáticamente el Estado está obligado en dar asilo y darlo no en 1 año, 2 años como era antes, darlo de inmediato. No conozco la ley, sé que están tratando de solucionar el problema y en eso hay que pegarse, hay que buscar ayuda y ver que